All right, thanks for checking out my second video in this sequence. Let's get started and discuss a good 3-month study plan. So, for the MCAT, I generally outline 3 key objectives when I talk to students about prepping for it. First is building a strong content foundation. You may have seen this referred to as content review online. And this really comes down to the fact that the MCAT covers so much material, and much of it is going to hopefully be recent and taught, you know, biochem, organic chem, gen chem. These are covered in undergraduate courses and are generally quite sufficient in what they cover. But there's no way that you took all of these things recently. Maybe like myself, right? I never took physics, for example. So when I took physics for the MCAT, it was, I had to build that content from scratch. It's possible you might have to do some of that as well, right? What I generally prescribe is this first month should be almost wholly dedicated to MCAT prep. And what I mean by that is this content review section where you're reading prep books like from Kaplan or the Berkeley Review or Exam Crackers. I don't endorse any of these companies specifically, but the point is that you have this information available and you're studying. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on how you organize this content review section, but I will talk about some common pitfalls. When doing content review, I highly advise that you just follow some sort of cookie cutter strategy, right? Much more in favor for a personalized strategy. This is one area that I critique things like prep courses, where everyone is going to be taught a week of OChem, a week of biochem, whatever, it's all the same. And so I can speak to myself personally. At the time when I took the MCAT, I knew that my organic chemistry was strong, so I barely gave it a day of content review, right? Keep in mind, these next 2 months, you're going to be able to do a ton of extra studying on specific concepts. So if you're strong on something in this initial month, you really don't need to devote multiple days to study something that you're strong at. You're just building this foundation to support you as you go into those next 2 months, right? But for me myself, again, I didn't take physics, so I had to devote almost 5 days fully of going through the physics material and learning everything because I didn't have that experience in undergrad, right? It was helpful and helped me to, you know, do well on my next material, but really personalizing your approach, focusing, making a 30-day plan to fit it within a month to cover everything, and make sure that you are spending more time on your weaknesses and less time on your strengths. The only other advice I have generally in this area of content review is to avoid only reading. So if you're a student that has you're reading maybe psychology, it's fair to say you can just read. But for a lot of these prep materials, they typically come with some practice problems. I advise that you don't use things like UWorld here, or I've heard of other things like Magoosh, tons of other, practice question based things. They're great, but I think they make more sense to use later, right? When you're in this period of the more meaningful studying. When you're just doing content review and you're just learning a new thing, there's no need for you to work so hard on MCAT style questions. You're really just trying to test your knowledge of the concept. Oh, sorry, right here. So instead, just do the stuff provided by the books that you're reading, right? Small practice problems, just simple problems, right? You don't need MCAT passages or anything like that. Just by doing that, or doing things like making flashcards, taking notes, whatever you do, I would avoid just only reading for content. So you've gone through your content review. You've built your content foundation. And again, it's not going to be near perfect at this point, but it's better than it was. Now, these next 2 months is where a lot of the magic is going to happen. So let's assume, for the sake of this, that your actual test date is this Friday. My advice would be every week ahead of the actual test, you take a full length. So training MCAT endurance and skills of the actual test is where full lengths, or FLs, as you've seen them online, really come in handy. These tests are full MCAT style with passages and discretes. They have the same general structure I discussed in the previous video. And the important idea here is that you need to do these to build that endurance. And also, they're a very useful area to do practice problems, obviously. But why do I, advising doing one weekly? Basically, Fridays, this would be the day that you only do a full length. Again, we're talking 6 to 8 hours of really sitting down and studying and doing work, right? It's draining. So I don't advise you do much else on this Friday, right? Reviewing the full lengths is really important, and I advise you do that on the second day, right? A general rule that I have, and we'll definitely talk about it in the next video when it comes to reviewing efficiently, is I advise you don't review stuff the same day that you did it. So do the full length, maybe look at the overall mark, but don't go through and review the whole thing, right? You can do that the next day. So when doing full lengths to build that MCAT endurance, right? What does that look like? Right? Generally here you've seen that I've drawn about 7 full lengths. You can add more or less. I think one a week is a good place to be. If you're trying to condense this down to 2 months, you might want to do more than one a week, but that's becoming very heavy. So the important thing with the MCAT full lengths, not using test conditions is very bad. So I highly advise that you take these tests and you actually time yourself, right? If you ran out of time on the section, don't keep doing problems. You ran out of time, right? This is good. Your goal here should be just like the actual test. So time yourself, keep yourself accountable. Absolutely zero referring to notes or Googling, right? You should not have your phone with you. No distractions. Try to do this in a no distraction environment. Take breaks the same way you would during the actual MCAT, right? The 15, 30, and 15-minute breaks in between the sections, take them, right? Maybe have a coffee or whatever. But the important idea here is that you're really training yourself for that marathon run, right? What some people will do is they'll do a single section at a time. So, I did a chem physics section today, right? And then I'll do a biochem section. But the problem is on the actual MCAT, you don't get to do that. You don't get to just do a single section. So I highly advise you do all of them to build that endurance. And the second one is not reviewing these full lengths effectively. We'll talk about that in the next video. Another quick one I'll mention here is don't reuse. So no reusing full lengths. If you've already done a full length, you already know the questions, you may as well use, it's way better to do another one. You'll do much better, so it'll inflate your expectations, but it's just not valuable to do that. So with that in mind, we have our full lengths, and we're reviewing them the day after, right? Let's talk about CARS and working that into the schedule. So CARS, especially for Canadian students, is extremely relevant. It's a reading comp section, and importantly, the main point of CARS is you're not supposed to bring outside material or outside ideas into the CARS passage. They're all section-based, there are no discretes, and you read and you have to answer the questions. There's tons of good content on how to approach CARS passages specifically. That's not what I'm doing here. I'm talking about how to actually get the practice in. So my advice is to basically always do CARS daily, but not necessarily do CARS passages. I advise doing full sections. So for the same reason I talked about the full length and the benefit of doing that all at once, some students really don't like to do CARS because it sucks, and fair enough, right? So you'll do one passage, which is like, 4 to 9 or 4 to 7 questions. And that's fine to do one a day. But again, on the MCAT, you're not taking one passage at a time. You're doing all of them in sequence. So I advise you do a full section, which is, I believe, 9 passages. And you do that. Here's an example of my schedule. I would do CARS on Monday, and I would review it on Tuesday. So Tuesday, you don't have to do CARS, but you are going to review your answers from the previous day. Wednesday, I would do another full CARS section. Thursday, I would review it. And then on Friday, you have the full length, so that has a CARS section, and you're going to be reviewing that on Saturday. And what that basically gives you here is 6 days of the week where you are touching CARS in some way. You're either actually doing CARS, a full section at a time, or you're reviewing a full section. That's a good system, right? I will talk about why this review strategy is helpful in the next video. Notice, however, that I've always kept one of these days free. For me here, I've put Sunday. I highly advise that even through your content review and up until the final test day, you pick 1 day a week to not study the MCAT. Okay, unless you don't have to do this, but if you're studying as hard as you should be in these areas to get the score that's going to get you into med school, you're only a human and you're probably going to burn out. I highly advise, this is a skill that I've learned in many other facets of my life, not just MCAT studying, but taking 1 day off a week will let you really work hard those 6 days and avoid burnout. So with this strategy, and this kind of brings me to the end of this video, we have our 3-month plan where we are doing a month of content review. We have our full lengths happening once a week and our cars happening regularly, right? All other spare time in here, because there's a lot of time, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, other than cars, I haven't said anything. This is where you're going to use content. Like UWorld. You're going to use content like the Magoosh questions, right? You can do practice problems. You can do practice sections, right? From your review of the full lengths and problems you've done, you can find maybe there's certain topics that you need to review. You can do more content review. The point is that this isn't really worth planning, right? What's worth planning is the full lengths and the cars prep and the content review section. So effectively, altogether, this is my general structure for a 3-month study plan that is going to get you ready for this MCAT on the final test date. So now that we've done this, and hopefully you found this somewhat useful, I'm going to move to my last video in this series where I discuss how to review MCAT problems, because obviously there's going to be a lot of problems you're doing, and if you don't review them efficiently, you're throwing many points down the drain. Efficient review is probably the most important thing when studying for the MCAT, especially in these last 2 months. And so we'll talk about that in the final video. Thanks, and I'll see you there.